Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. I'm your host, Dave Markel, and this is episode 177. I want to underscore something that I feel is pretty unique to this podcast that I don't emphasize nearly enough. And that is the aspect that many of the guests that appear on this show are my listeners. They catch some of the episodes, and in this case, with this particular guest, all of the episodes, and they immediately want to connect with the value that this show offers, the recognized worth and ability to add an enormous amount of growth to their healing voyage by coming to the mic and sharing their grief, pain, and their healing. This week's conversation is a listener who reached out to me on Messenger and told me that he had a story he wanted to share, but wasn't quite sure he had the courage yet. We stayed in touch, continued to communicate, and then he made the decision to do this episode. This is Daniel. He's amazingly brave and strong, and I'm anxious for you to hear him talk about his sexual assault story. So let's get to it, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Daniel.
Okay, so I grew up in Michigan, where I've lived my entire life. Reasonably happy childhood. Parents never divorced, nothing too extraordinary other than events that we will get to in a minute.
Do you mind telling us about the kind of work you do?
So I actually work in a shop that makes vinyl banners.
Okay, yeah.
And we ship all over the country, so.
Wow. Well, Daniel, it's really a pleasure to have you here. And just for my audience sake, I'll tell you that Daniel reached out to me via Messenger after finding the podcast and listening to a few episodes. He communicated with me that he wanted to be on the show and tell his story. And Daniel, I'm really glad you did. That takes a lot of strength and fortitude and courage. Daniel and I have been in contact with each other probably going on 2 months now, maybe more. We just have not had the opportunity schedule-wise to get this actual recording session going. Daniel, thank you so much for being here and for doing this with me. If I could, Daniel, what are you able to tell me about your sex assault experience?
Okay, so I don't remember what age I was exactly. I estimate I was around 10. And, when my parents would leave, go to the store or whatnot, they would leave me and my brother at home, and he would sexually assault me. He would force me to pull down my pants and lay on the ground, and he would rub himself up between my butt cheeks until he would climax on my lower back.
When that situation occurred, were you younger or older than him?
He's my older brother.
Older? By how many years, may I ask?
By 3 years.
What are you able to tell us about the feeling that you had emotionally when these situations would occur? Do you have any recollection of that?
I think at the time I didn't really understand what was going on. It wasn't until years later when in school they start to talk about consent and whatnot. And that's when it just dawned on me what exactly happened and the gravity of it.
And what was your reaction? How did you respond?
Just never talked about it. The first time I ever told anybody about it was in 2010, my then girlfriend, now wife.
Were you able to tell her, like you just did with us, what actually had happened?
Yeah, I did tell her.
And what are you able to tell us about that impact on the relationship at that point?
I don't think it significantly impacted the relationship. She was very supportive about it. She was curious about why me and my brother, we don't talk. We're not close. She's very close with her sister, and obviously she was curious about what was between me and my brother.
Yeah. Do you have a recollection, Daniel, of when you really started facing what had happened, about how old you were and what type of thought process you went through at that time?
Well, a lot of it was just I didn't want to tell anybody about it, and I just kind of made it part of myself. I don't think I really truly started processing it until last year.
Can you tell us about that process? How did that occur?
Well, that was just, again, with listening to your podcast, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things, made me understand a lot of things. We talk about different body positions. I'm not ever comfortable laying on my stomach, and that made me realize that was the origin of that.
What can you tell us about your healing journey since last year?
I've come a long way. I've told, I think, 9 or 10 different people in my life. Prior to that, there was only one person that was alive that knew that story. I had told a good friend of mine maybe about 2017, but then he passed away the following year.
Oh, I'm sorry. What are you able to remember about that experience of actually telling somebody for the first time?
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Even to today, there's still a lot of anxiety about it. And it's something, obviously, I don't tell everybody. I don't think everybody's emotionally mature enough for that.
Yeah. What's your goal, Daniel, in coming on this show and talking about it this way?
This is another way to just talk about it. It's you've got to air it, otherwise you'll never continue processing it.
And how do you process it? What are your coping mechanisms and your healing mechanisms?
For the most part, my coping mechanism is just to listen to a lot of music. I often take comfort in some of the sad or angry music. Not that I'm necessarily an angry or sad person in general. That's just my outlet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. Have you explored the idea of therapy?
I've actually been to therapy twice in my life, not for that, for other things. I think my mom saw that something was going on with me, but she really wasn't sure what. And so she did take me to therapy when I was an early teen, but I just didn't have the trust level to discuss with the therapist about it.
But it was something that you remembered at that point. You just...
Oh yeah. At that point I was definitely aware that it had happened and multiple times.
And your decision was just not to talk about it with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that was knowing that any medical professional is a mandated reporter. It wasn't something I was interested in reporting.
Mm-hmm. And this obviously has impacted your daily life.
Yeah.
And are you able to expound in the ways that this has impacted your life?
I mean, I think overall I'm pretty well adjusted. Obviously, there's just certain triggers. Like I was watching a movie and it was about a guy who was betrayed by his brother, and that, of course, was a big trigger for me.
Sure. Because, as you said, you don't have an ongoing relationship with him.
No.
What about the rest of your family?
The rest of my family I have a relationship with. No one in the family knows about what happened.
Do any of them listen to podcasts?
I'm not sure. That's part of why I wanted to keep the last name out of this.
What will happen, or what will you do if, for instance, a friend recognizes your voice and the name Daniel, or your family hears about this? What kind of impact would that have on you?
It's hard to say exactly. I'll be honest about it. I'm not going to try to hide that I was on this show. If anybody asks me about it, I'll be upfront about it.
Yeah. When you have told other people about this, I think I remember in one of our text conversations, you mentioned that you had told somebody who also told you that they had been sexually assaulted. Can you tell me about that conversation and how that impacted your relationship with him?
It's actually happened twice. And I think in both instances, it kind of drew us closer as friends because it was a shared experience. Even if not at the same time, it was, still something we both had dealt with.
Mm-hmm. How are you feeling right now?
I'm a little anxious, but not too bad.
And those anxious feelings, I do remember a conversation, and you don't have to talk about this part if you don't want to, Daniel, but you had mentioned an anxiety attack that had kind of come on suddenly and something that you had never really experienced before.
Yeah, that was so far the first and thankfully only time that's happened.
Mm-hmm. How did you deal with that?
Well, I just breathed through it. I mean, I know a lot of people with anxiety, so I kind of know what you have to do. The more you fight it, the worse it's going to get.
Right. I'm kind of curious. This is already unlike most of my conversations. There's not a lot of one-sided talk on your part with just expounding and freely talking about this. Is that something that you feel is part of the anxiety and anxiousness of talking about the assaults, or is it that you don't want to go into more detail, not necessarily about the assault itself, but just about the impact that it's having on your life and the emotional responses that you have both internally and with outside relationships?
It's hard for me to talk about myself. I spent decades not talking about myself. There was ingrained behavior that I'm trying to overcome now. So part of when I went to see a therapist in my early teens, it was I was diagnosed with ADD, and I wonder if that had something to do with the emotional shutting down. A lot of the research I've done has indicated that probably it did. Not being comfortable with myself obviously made me not really want to engage with people.
Mm-hmm.
And, just shut myself down in other ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you have listened to this show, are there particular episodes that have made an impact on you, or that have kind of that stand out in your mind as episodes that have helped you in particular?
Yeah, I really liked, I believe it was 173, which was Beth. I kind of saw some parallels in if I'm remembering the correct episode, saw some parallels between her mental state and mine. And another thing that I've noticed a lot of people talk about, and this is something that I have and still do struggle with, which is suicidal ideation. It's nothing I've ever attempted to act on, but it's like if something happens in my life, my first instinct is, what if you didn't have to deal with anything anymore? And I always talk myself down from it because overall, been through a lot of things and everybody has challenges.
Yeah, that's for sure. Going through some of my own right now, not necessarily sex assault based, but relationships are hard, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to tell me about your relationship with your wife and how this may have had some sort of impact on that relationship?
Okay, so I don't think it negatively impacted the relationship in any way. Like I said, she was and still is very good about it. She understands why I don't want to engage with my brother.
Mm-hmm.
The catalyst for me telling her was her telling me about her own assault in the past. So I think that was, again, another thing that kind of drew us closer.
That makes sense. Sure. Does she listen to the show?
She's not really into podcasts at all.
Yeah. How has the podcast impacted you? You said you've listened to every episode now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. And we were talking before I actually started this show part. Daniel said that his work allows him to listen to multiple podcasts during the day. How has that changed your life?
I think it's caused me to learn a lot about myself that I didn't know previously. Just in listening to different therapists, just listening with your show, and then like when I was going through the back episodes of your show, I'd listen to it for a few hours, get a few episodes in, then it was like, okay, now I need to listen to something lighter, lighten up the mood, So I'd switch it to a humor based one.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. I mean, these topics of rape and sexual assault, interpersonal violence are very difficult to talk about and to face. It's part of why I am so adamant that we need to normalize this conversation. We need to talk about it more because we need to change our societal views and responses to rape and sex assault. Instead of disbelieving and blaming victims, we need to take more positive action and recognize that the perpetrator is the cause of these, not the victim. And I think your story is a perfect example of that, Daniel. You were younger than your brother and probably felt compelled and obligated to do what he told you to do. Maybe a little bit of fear involved. Do you have a remembrance of fear?
Mm-hmm. I don't think fear really played too much into it. Like, he never was physically violent with me. I mean, other than, just general roughhousing, which, kids do. But, one thing I do want to talk about, you've mentioned on your show about implicit memories, and I've actually, about a month ago, had one of those surface. which made that day kind of tough. It was something I'd completely forgotten about. It was in high school. I was at a like a theater event, live theater, and this girl next to me, it's just middle of nowhere. She just punches me in the testicles, right? And so when I hunch over, she sticks her hand on the back of my pants, which, was, again, nothing I ever talked about with anybody.
That would be shocking.
Yeah, to say the least.
It was someone you knew?
It was just somebody I'd been talking with that day. This was the first day I'd ever seen this person.
What was your interpretation of that event? How did you deal with that?
I just, at the time, I didn't. I just pretended like it didn't happen, and I realize now, because I actually ran into her a few years back, that at the time, and I did know this at the time, but she was using a lot of drugs, so I realized that probably wasn't the actual version of herself. That was, the chemically altered version of her.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what her motivation was in doing that? Was
that she had offered to take me to the bathroom and make me feel better, which I of course declined because, for one, I was already in a relationship at that time, and for two, okay, you're not a stable person. I don't really want to be near you.
Did it seem like the response of hitting you in your groin and then sexually assaulting you by pushing her hand down the back of your pants, did it feel anger inspired?
Honestly, I don't remember. That was a good number of years ago. That was
Sure. It's interesting though that was an implicit memory and somehow something activated it and it came to the surface. Do you have a recollection of what was going on that maybe made you have that activated implicit memory?
I honestly, I know I was listening to a podcast. I couldn't tell you which one. I don't know which one I was listening to.
It's interesting though that the science talks about that very thing, that oftentimes the activator, the thing that triggers, and I'm not real fond of the word trigger, but what sometimes triggers these implicit memories are things that, as we try to analyze where that came from, are sometimes impossible to pinpoint in terms of what may have caused the activation of a memory. And what's more important is what we do with them when they do surface. And Daniel, are you able to tell us about what your response was when you had that memory?
A lot of it was just sitting in my feelings. A good friend of mine, he's got a quote he always uses, which is "get comfortable being uncomfortable." Mm-hmm. Which, of course, I plan on sharing this episode with him because he already knows all of what happened, and so he's going to get a kick out of me giving him a little shout out on that.
Good. It's great. I like it.
But on the subject of implicit memories, one of the things that I still do, I have dealt with for as long as I can remember is nightmares every single night. When it gets really bad, it's like 4 or 5 of them a night. But now with talking about my sexual assault history, the nightmares have eased up a little bit. It's gotten more manageable. Sometimes I even do have good dreams, but not frequently.
What are you able to tell us about the nightmares?
I mean, it could be anything from something relatively innocuous, like the other night I had a nightmare about venomous snakes. It could be something as simple as that, or like car crashes are a common theme, or death. For instance, I see a lot in dreams, those are the ones that really bother me. Like, sure. The ones that really bother me, those ones stay with me for days. But like the usual one that I have is like, okay, it might bother me for like an hour or two, and then whatever, I move on past it.
Mm-hmm. What are your coping mechanisms?
Again, just sitting in my feelings, or I use music a lot. I have an extensive playlist. I've got probably 80 something playlists built on Spotify.
Wow. Yeah. That's great. Do you have any hobbies or things to also keep you occupied when you're not at work?
Well, to be honest, most of the time I'm at work. I do work pretty extended hours. But when I'm not at work, I'm usually just hanging out at home with my wife and my kids, just spend time with them.
Yeah. How many children do you have?
I have two, which, in a way, I'm thankful for that part of my history because I have two girls. So if they ever undergo something similar, I understand where they'd be coming from on it.
Yeah. You've heard me, I'm sure, talk about Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. Have you read that or read any other type of psychology books that might help?
I've actually consumed two books because of your show. The first was John Stamos's book, which was excellent. One of your guests had mentioned it, and that inspired me to check it out from the library. And also Bessel van der Kolk's book. It's also been uploaded to Spotify, so I listened to that one day. Well, actually, over the course of a few days while I was working, because it's a pretty long one.
Yeah, it's a pretty thick book, that's for sure. What were your impressions of that? Bessel van der Kolk. It's Kolk.
That book, it kind of highlighted like some of the reasons for some of my behaviors. As far as just not talking about it, or just it kind of helped me to realize that this is something that everyone with a similar story goes through.
That's true. And you've probably heard me say this too, is that while every single rape or sexual assault is unique to that individual, and if they've been sexually assaulted or raped multiple times, each one of those times is unique, but that there are commonalities for everyone in these types of assaults and this type of an injury. It does make an impact on the body and the mind. And so there's commonality in that, and there's some consolation in knowing that you're not the only one who's gone through some of the things that you've gone through. Are there other things that you would want to talk about while we're involved in this show that you hoped to communicate with other people and hope to accomplish?
So one of the things that I've heard a couple of people mention it, but I want to reiterate it, that even if your story isn't as traumatic as somebody else's, it's still trauma to you. It's still worth talking about and recognizing that it did happen. I read a quote one time. It said something about someone else's suffering being greater than yours does not minimize yours.
That is so true. And I'm glad you brought that point up because I talk about it a lot. A lot of people will tell me in emails or texts that they listen to the show, but they don't want to go on the show because of that very thing. Well, my sexual assault experience or my rape experience wasn't that serious. And it's, I don't want to waste airtime or your time talking about something that really doesn't compare to some of the severity of other people's rapes or sexual assaults. And I say the same thing you just said. I think that's a great point, Daniel, is that if it impacted you, if it's changed your life, if it's something that causes intrusive memories and a alteration of your lifestyle, it's important. It's traumatic. It's something that we should talk about. And I don't want to minimize anyone's sexual assault or rape experience because they're all serious. You're absolutely right. Thanks for bringing that out. What else comes to mind?
Well, one of the things that does come to mind is, my wife was not the only partner that I've ever had that told me about a sexual assault that happened to them. But she's, for whatever reason, she's the only one I felt comfortable enough to share my own story with. And then years after that, we got married and, still married today. So I don't know why I just felt more comfortable with her. I don't know really why, but it's just, that's how it is.
And she's supportive, I take it? And
oh, yes, extremely.
Yeah. Does it ever come up again from the time you originally told her? Do you talk about this as an ongoing, maybe periodic conversation?
I very rarely talk about it with her. And she never asks. If we talk about it, it's because I chose to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
When I started listening to your show and started talking about it and the nightmares eased up, I told her, I'm like, the nightmares have been a lot better lately. And she asked me like why I thought that was. And I told her that, I've started telling more people about the sexual assault. So
It's amazing how the brain responds to an outward manifestation of those deep inward painful thoughts. So I think that's really a great aspect of you being on this show, is talking about that very thing. I appreciate it.
and it's funny when you're talking about things that I kind of hope to achieve by being on the show. All yesterday I was thinking about all of what I was going to talk about. It consumed my mind yesterday. Is all I was thinking about. And so I started thinking like, oh, I should make like a bulletin list, bullet points. But I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to let the conversation flow naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And in going back to not talking about myself in the past, there was an assignment in high school that I think about a lot. And it was, we had to take a song of our choosing and relate it to our life and explain to the class why it related to our life. And I refused to do that. I took a 0 on that. There was no way I was going to let a classroom full of people into myself at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Just especially knowing, like, kids are not always the most sensitive of people and don't realize what's appropriate to joke or not joke about.
Right.
So at that time, I'm like, I'm just going to take a 0 on that, especially because, again, mandated reporting and.
Yeah. Those are important issues to think about when you're deciding whether or not to tell your story as a minor, as a child. Yeah, that's a great point. What's your message to the listeners that will hear this episode?
My message is don't try to self-contain it. It's going to come out one way or the other. So you have to ventilate the issue, let it breathe. If you just try to push it down, it will come up later.
That's true. Yeah. It sometimes comes back later as a monster. Right?
Yeah, there's another quote I read one time which is pertinent. It said, if you don't schedule maintenance for your machine will schedule it for you, and often at the least convenient time. And the mind is very much like a machine. You have to take care of it.
So true. Daniel, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
I think at this time that there is not. I'm definitely open to conversing with you on another time. I know you've mentioned that with other
absolutely
guests. I definitely think I'm going to get a lot of positive impacts from talking on this show.
I believe you will too. I think there's a lot to be said about having the courage and fortitude and strength to come on to a platform where people around the world, literally thousands of people, will hear this episode, and it's out there in perpetuity. So through time, who knows how many people this will reach and what that impact will have on their lives. Maybe they'll reach out because of Daniel and want to be on the show and tell their story. So to me, it's a very positive thing on many, many levels and in many dynamics for you to have that desire and courage to come here and tell your story the way you have. I appreciate it. And I think the listeners will too. So thank you. And yes, let's keep in mind the attitude of we should check back in with each other, stay in communication on our texts back and forth, and then eventually somewhere down the road, 8, 10, 12 months from now, you come back, tell us how things are going. Tell us where the nightmares are. Tell us how your interpersonal relationships are going, and those types of things to bring us up to date on your emotional well-being. I would love that.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, great. Daniel, what will you do after this to take care of yourself? Because this is, as I've mentioned on other shows, a very common activator
Well, at this point, I've got about an hour and a half before I have to leave for work. And I'm by myself here at the house, so I can just kind of just chill out. And, as I go through the workday, I'll probably listen to a lot of music. As I mentioned, that sometimes helps me through things.
Good deep breathing exercises help a lot. I think you've found that out already. Going for long walks, if you have the time to do that, either on lunch break or after work, just, being out doing something physically, but also allowing your mind to have the space to open up and absorb what else is going on around you, but also processing those internal thoughts. And I do absolutely wish the best for you, Daniel. I think what you've done here is a very brave thing. And I appreciate you wanting to be on the show and having the courage to follow up with it and be here with me today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me talk.
Absolutely. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to thank Daniel, not just for trusting me with his story, but for trusting himself. What you heard today didn't start with confidence or certainty. It started where so many healing journeys start: hesitation, doubt, that quiet question of, am I really ready? Daniel didn't come to this microphone because he had it all figured out. He came because he was willing to take the next step, and that willingness matters a lot. If you're listening to this podcast and you recognize pieces of yourself in Daniel, if you've ever been sitting with these stories, feeling that pull, wondering if your voice belongs here, let me say this clearly: it does. This show exists because people like Daniel choose courage over silence, even when their hands are shaking. Healing doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty, and it requires space. This is that space. As always, if this conversation stirred something up for you, please take care of yourself. Reach out, talk to someone you trust, and if you're able, share this episode, because you never know who needs to hear Daniel's voice at exactly the right moment. Finally, as I close out this episode, let me remind you to please do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors. A great way to do this is to start by believing, and to help normalize the conversation about the realities of rape and sexual assault. Because the truth is, we all know someone who has experienced rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.